I never imagined a simple smart lock on my backyard pool gate would land me in the middle of a police incident. But that's exactly what happened when my neighbor Karen's daughter decided to invite herself over to swim in my pool without permission. The shocking part wasn't just that she trespassed, it was that when she found herself locked inside, she panicked and called 911, claiming I had trapped her. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights were outside my house, and I was suddenly being questioned for a crime I hadn't even committed. I stood there in disbelief, explaining to the officers that my pool was private property, fully fenced, and secured with a new smart lock system that automatically closes after entry. It was meant to keep strangers out, not lock them in. The officer's eyebrows shot up when I told him the girl had no right to be there in the first place. Karen arrived moments later, furious not at her daughter, but at me. She shouted about how I was being cruel and endangering her child. The officers, however, weren't buying it. They calmly reminded her that trespassing is against the law, and that her daughter was lucky I hadn't pressed charges. The situation was surreal. How could someone break into my pool, call the cops on me, and still try to play the victim? But this incident opened my eyes to the entitlement of certain neighbors and the chaos they can create. What started as a safety upgrade for my property turned into a neighborhood drama so absurd it could have been ripped straight from a TV show. Little did Karen know, the 911 call ended up backfiring, leaving her family humiliated and me more determined than ever to protect what's mine. Asterisk, when I bought my house 3 years ago, one of the things that sold me on it was the backyard pool. It wasn't anything massive, no resort-style waterfall or swim-up, but it was clean, private, and surrounded by a tall wooden fence that made it feel like my little slice of peace. I liked knowing that at the end of a long day, I could step outside, dip my feet in, and let the world go quiet. But as anyone with neighbors knows, peace is fragile. Mine was in the form of Karen, who lived 2 houses down. Karen had a way of treating the entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. From complaining about people's lawn lengths to telling the mailman he was too slow, I had learned to brush off her passive-aggressive comments and fake smiles. What I hadn't expected was for her daughter to become a much bigger problem. Her daughter, Emily, was about 15. To be fair, she wasn't a terrible kid, loud, dramatic, and spoiled. Yes, but not cruel. She just had that same streak of entitlement her mom carried like a badge of honor. I often caught her looking over at my yard when I was swimming, her eyes following the shimmer of the water. It made me uneasy, though I didn't think much of it at first. By midsummer, though, I began to notice odd things. My pool toys and inflatable lounge chair, a few floaties were shifted around in ways I didn't leave them. Once I found a wet towel I didn't own draped over my fence. I shrugged it off as coincidence. Maybe the wind, maybe a mistake. But deep down, I had a nagging suspicion that someone was sneaking in. That's why I finally decided to install a smart lock system on the gate. It was a simple upgrade, but it gave me a sense of control. The lock connected to my phone, and I could open or close it with a tap. The best part, once the gate closed, it latched tight automatically. No more worrying about kids from the street wandering in for a quick dip. The Saturday it all went down was blazing hot, the kind of day where the air feels thick and the sun bakes the concrete until it almost steams. I stayed inside most of the morning, enjoying the air conditioning, and around noon I sat down with a cold drink to watch TV. That's when I heard it, the sound of splashing. Not faint splashes like a bird dipping in the water, but someone is in the pool splashing. I frowned, set my glass down, and went to the back window. What I saw made my blood run hot. Emily Karen's daughter was in my pool, not at the edge, not peeking over the fence, but fully stretched out on my inflatable float like it was hers. Her sunglasses were perched on her head. She had earbuds in, and she looked perfectly comfortable. For a moment, I just stared. My brain refused to process it. This wasn't some mistake. She had deliberately opened my gate, walked into my yard, and made herself at home. My first instinct was to storm out there and tell her to get out, but something stopped me. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the thought of how Karen would twist the story if she got involved. So instead, I waited. 15 minutes passed. Emily sipped from a water bottle, scrolled on her phone, and kicked her legs in the water like she had all the time in the world. Then, casually, she climbed out and headed toward the gate. That's when the real chaos began. I heard the rattle of the gate handle, followed by a pause, then more rattling, louder this time. Emily tugged, shoved, and finally kicked at it, but the gate wouldn't budge. My smart lock had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had sealed the gate as soon as she came in, and now she couldn't get out without the code on my phone. At first, I admit, I felt a grim sort of satisfaction. She had trespassed and now she was stuck. Actions, consequences. But then I saw her pull out her phone, her face shifting from annoyance to panic. She started pacing near the gate, glancing around like she expected me to pop out any second. And then she did the unthinkable. She called someone. I couldn't hear the words, but her frantic gestures and the way she kept pointing at the gate told me enough. She wasn't calling her mom, she was calling the police. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. Surely she wouldn't actually tell the cops she was locked in my pool after sneaking in without permission, right? But just minutes later, I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder. My chest tightened. She had done it. She had really called 911. Red and blue lights flickered against my living room walls as the police car pulled up out front. I rushed outside, and there was Emily at the gate, waving her arms like she'd been stranded on an island. The officers climbed out of their car, exchanging confused glances as she shouted, "He locked me in. He trapped me." One officer held up a hand for her to calm down, then turned to me. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes," I said firmly, though my voice shook with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is my backyard. That's my pool, and that is my locked gate." The other officer looked at Emily, then back at me. "Do you know this girl?" "She's my neighbor's daughter," I explained. "She wasn't invited. She trespassed, and my lock automatically secures once the gate is closed. She locked herself in." Emily's face burned red, and she blurted out, "That's not true. He trapped me. I was just swimming, and then I couldn't leave." For a few long seconds, nobody said a word. The officers studied me, then her, then the yard. Finally, one of them sighed. "Miss, did you have permission to be here?" Emily hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Well, no, but that's enough," the officer cut in. "You can't call 911 because you've got yourself stuck trespassing. That's not how this works." At that exact moment, I saw Karen storming down the sidewalk toward us, her arms flailing, her voice carrying before she even reached the driveway. And that was how the battle truly began. Karen's voice hit my ears before she even turned the corner of the fence. It was sharp, shrill, and commanding, like she thought the world was her stage, and we were all actors in her personal drama. "What is going on here?" she screeched, stomping toward the officers with her hands on her hips. Her blonde hair was frizzing from the heat, her oversized sunglasses slid halfway down her nose, and her face was already flushed from a combination of anger and the afternoon. The two police officers exchanged a look that said they'd seen this type before. One of them held up a hand. "Ma'am, please calm down. Your daughter is fine. We're just trying to sort out what happened." "Fine." Karen practically barked. "She was locked in a pool like an animal. He trapped her in there." She pointed at me with a finger so stiff it might as well have been a dagger. I opened my mouth, but the officer beat me to it. "Actually, ma'am, from what we understand, your daughter entered this property without permission. The gate locked automatically after she came in, and she called 911 claiming she was trapped. That's what brought us here." Karen's eyes widened as if the officer had just told her the earth was flat. "Without permission? Are you joking? She's just a kid. You mean to tell me you're siding with him?" She jabbed her finger in my direction again, her voice trembling with indignation. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "this is private property. Your daughter did not have consent to enter the pool. That is trespassing." For once, Karen didn't seem to have a rehearsed comeback. She sputtered, her jaw working up and down like a fish gasping for air. Then she turned to Emily, who was standing off to the side, arms folded and head tilted downward. "Emily, tell them the truth. Tell them he locked you in there." Emily glanced at her mother, then at me, then at the officers. She opened her mouth, but the hesitation was answer enough. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Miss," he asked, his tone calm but firm, "did he force you into the pool or lock you in the gate on purpose?" Emily squirmed, chewing on her lip. Finally, she muttered, "No, I just went in, and the gate locked." Karen's head whipped around so fast I half expected it to spin completely. "What?" she shrieked. "Emily, do you realize what you've done? You embarrassed me in front of the whole street. Do you know how dangerous that lock is? You could have been hurt, Mom." Emily groaned, rolling her eyes. "It wasn't that bad. I was fine. I just didn't have." Karen cut her off. She turned back to the officers, her voice dripping with venom. "Do you see? This man is endangering children. What if there had been an emergency? What if she had drowned and no one could get to her? This is negligence." The taller officer sighed. "Ma'am, with respect, the pool has a safety lock specifically to prevent unauthorized entry. It's his property. He has every right to secure it however he sees fit." I folded my arms and finally spoke up, my tone calm but laced with frustration. "Karen, your daughter trespassed. She's lucky I didn't call the police myself. Instead, she called 911, which wasted valuable emergency resources. If anything, I should be the one pressing charges." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been armed. Karen's jaw dropped, her face turning an even deeper shade of red. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely rattled. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. The officer stepped in before the tension could snap. "Sir, you are within your rights to press charges, but it's your decision. For now, we'll be filing a report. And ma'am," he turned to Karen with a pointed stare, "you need to understand that your daughter's actions were not only inappropriate but also illegal. If this happens again, there could be consequences." Karen threw her arms up like the whole world was conspiring against her. "Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. You're all taking his side." The shorter officer's patience had clearly run dry. "Ma'am, nobody is taking sides. We're explaining the law. Private property is private property. That's the end of it." Karen let out a dramatic gasp, the kind you'd expect from an actress in a bad soap opera. Well, if the law doesn't protect children, then what good is it? She wailed. Emily groaned again, covering her face with both hands. Mom, can we just go please? But Karen wasn't done. She pointed at me one last time, her fingers shaking with fury. This isn't over. You think you can just lock people out like you're some kind of king? You'll regret this. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but just a small, incredulous laugh that slipped out before I could stop it. That only made her angrier. The officers guided Emily out of the gate, and I unlocked it with my phone to let her through. She walked out quickly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Karen glared at me one final time before stomping off down the street, dragging Emily behind her by the wrist like a petulant child. When they were gone, the taller officer turned to me, his voice softer. Now, sorry you had to deal with that. We'll note everything in the report. If you want to press charges later, just call the station. I nodded, though my hands were still trembling with leftover adrenaline. Thanks. I just can't believe she called 911 over this. The officer gave a humorless chuckle. You'd be surprised how often people use 911 for the wrong reasons. Honestly, it's lucky for her you're being reasonable. Not everyone would have been. They left soon after, the red and blue lights fading down the street, leaving me standing in my driveway in stunned silence. The neighborhood was quiet again, but I knew it wouldn't last, because Karen was right about one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and as much as I hated the thought, I knew she was already plotting her next move. For the rest of that day, I couldn't shake the sound of Karen's shrieking voice from my head. Even hours later, as I sat in my living room trying to watch a movie, it lingered like an echo that refused to fade. I knew Karen well enough to understand one thing: she never let things go. If anything, being called out in front of the police had humiliated her, and Karen hated nothing more than looking like a fool. The first sign of her retaliation came the very next morning. I walked outside to grab the newspaper, and there she was, standing at the edge of her yard with her arms crossed, talking animatedly to another neighbor. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Dangerous, irresponsible, trapped my daughter. The other neighbor nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, but too polite to walk away. Karen saw me glance over, and her lips curled into a smug smile as if to say, I'm already turning the neighborhood against you. I sighed and went back inside. Part of me wanted to confront her, to stop the lies before they spread, but another part of me knew that arguing with Karen was like trying to wrestle smoke. You'd exhaust yourself and still end up with nothing in your hands. 2 days later, I noticed a printed flyer taped to the community mailbox. My stomach sank when I read it. In bold black letters, it said, "Concerned parent warning, unsafe pool practices in our neighborhood." Below that was a paragraph clearly written by Karen describing how a child had been endangered by being trapped inside a neighbor's pool area with no way to escape in case of emergency. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't need to. Everyone on the street knew who had the only pool with a brand new lock. I ripped the flyer down, but by then the damage was done. Over the next few days I noticed subtle changes. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Parents who used to chat with me when walking their kids past my house kept their conversations short. At the grocery store, I caught a woman giving me a strange look before whispering something to a friend. Karen's plan was working. She was painting me as the villain one evening. As I was watering the plants in my front yard, a man I barely knew stopped on the sidewalk. He was new to the neighborhood, moved in just a few months ago. "Hey," he said cautiously, "I heard something about your pool. Just wanted to ask, you didn't really lock a kid inside, did you?" I clenched, the garden hose tighter than I meant to. "No," I said firmly. "Her daughter trespassed." My lock closed automatically, and instead of admitting she was somewhere she shouldn't be, she called 911. The man raised his eyebrows. "Ah, that's not how Karen tells it." "Of course not," I muttered. "Karen doesn't tell anything straight." He chuckled a little, then nodded. "Well, thanks for clearing it up. People talk, you know." As he walked away, I realized just how bad this could get. Karen wasn't just angry, she was actively campaigning to ruin my reputation in the neighborhood, and if people believed her version of the story, I'd go from being the guy with the nice pool to the reckless neighbor no one trusted. Things escalated a week later. I woke up one morning to find someone had thrown soda cans and chip bags into my pool. It wasn't subtle. The wrappers floated lazily on the surface, bobbing like mocking reminders of my new reality. My first thought was Karen's daughter, but then again, it could have been anyone emboldened by Karen's gossip. As I cleaned up the mess with my net, anger bubbled inside me. I had stayed quiet, hoping the storm would pass, but Karen wasn't letting go. She wanted me painted as a danger to the neighborhood, and now it seemed she was encouraging others to treat me like an outsider. That evening, I heard voices by my fence. I paused, listening. Emily's voice floated over, sharp with teenage defiance. "Mom, I don't even care. The pool is nice. He doesn't even use it half the time." Karen's reply was lower but filled with venom. "You don't go near that place again, do you hear me? He'll twist things to make us look bad." He thinks he's smarter than me, but he's not. Nobody makes a fool of me. I should have been relieved she was telling her daughter to stay away, but instead, her words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't about Emily anymore. It wasn't about trespassing, it was about Karen's pride. And when someone like Karen felt their pride had been attacked, they didn't stop until they got revenge. The breaking point came during a neighborhood meeting the following Saturday. Our homeowners association had scheduled it weeks earlier, and usually, these gatherings were about mundane topics like landscaping or trash collection. But as soon as the floor opened for general concerns, Karen shot up from her chair like a rocket. "I want to bring up a very serious safety issue," she announced, her voice dripping with self-importance. "A certain homeowner here has installed a dangerous locking system on their pool. My daughter was trapped inside. She could have been seriously hurt. What if there had been a fire? What if she drowned?" All eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of the room pressing down. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stand. "That's not what happened," I said evenly. "Your daughter trespassed onto my property without permission. The gate locked automatically. The police were involved, and they confirmed it wasn't my fault. If anything, Karen, you owe me an apology for spreading lies." Gasps rippled across the room. Karen's face twisted with rage. "Lies? Oh, please. Everyone knows how controlling you are. Everyone knows you sit in that house all day spying on people. Who even needs a smart lock like that unless you're trying to trap someone?" Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I saw nods from a couple of neighbors, and doubt flickered in their eyes. But then, to my surprise, the new man from down the street spoke up. "That's not fair, Karen. I talked to him. The police backed him up. Maybe your daughter shouldn't have been somewhere she didn't belong." The room shifted, murmurs spread, and I saw Karen's confidence falter. Her eyes darted around, searching for support. But it wasn't as strong as she thought. The HOA president finally stepped in. "All right, enough. This is not the place for personal disputes. The matter has already been handled by the authorities. Let's move on." Karen sat down, seething, her arms crossed so tightly it looked like she might snap. But as I returned to my seat, I knew this wasn't finished. If anything, I had just thrown fuel on her fire, because Karen wasn't simply angry anymore. She was out for war. After the HOA meeting, I had foolishly hoped Karen would let things die down. She hadn't won the crowd the way she wanted to, and I thought maybe the embarrassment would finally quiet her. But if there was one thing I had learned about Karen, it was that humiliation only made her double down. She wasn't the type to lick her wounds in silence. She was the type to plan her next move. It started small, with little inconveniences that were impossible to prove but suspicious enough to raise my eyebrows. My trash cans were mysteriously tipped over twice in 1 week, spilling garbage across the driveway. Packages I was expecting from Amazon went missing from my porch. One night I even found a fresh set of scratches on the side of my car. Shallow, but deliberate. I couldn't say with absolute certainty it was Karen, but who else had a reason? The timing was too perfect, too connected to our feud. Then came the phone calls. 3 different times, city inspectors showed up at my door after anonymous complaints were filed about my property. Once it was about unsafe pool fencing. Another time, it was about noise violations even though I hadn't hosted anyone for weeks. The third was the most absurd, unlicensed construction in my backyard. The inspectors each left shaking their heads, saying everything was fine, but it was clear someone was trying to weaponize the system against me, and I didn't need a detective to know who. One night, around 10, I was sitting in the backyard with the porch light off, just enjoying the quiet. That's when I heard the gate rattle. My chest tightened. I slipped silently into the shadows and watched. A figure crept along the fence line, flashlight in hand. My stomach dropped when the beam caught a familiar face. It was Karen. She was inside my yard. I stepped out of the shadows before I could stop myself. "Karen," I barked. She jumped, the flashlight clattering from her hand. "What are you doing out here?" she demanded, as though I were the intruder. "This is my yard," I snapped. "What are you doing sneaking around at night?" She straightened up, trying to collect her dignity, though her face was pale. "I was checking to make sure your dangerous lock isn't a threat to the neighborhood. Someone has to look out for the kids around here, since you clearly don't care. By trespassing on my property at 10 o'clock at night," I said, my voice low and furious. "That's not looking out for kids, Karen. That's stalking." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare accuse me. You think you're so clever with your gadgets and your smug little rules. But everyone knows you're unstable. You don't belong here." That word "unstable" made my skin crawl. It was more than just gossip. It was slander, an attempt to paint me as some kind of menace to the community. "Leave," I said flatly. "Now, before I call the police." She snatched up her flashlight, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off through the gate. The smart lock clicked shut behind her, and I stood there shaking with anger. The next morning, things got worse. A letter arrived in the mail from the HOA informing me that I had been fined for creating unsafe conditions for minors in the neighborhood. The letter claimed multiple complaints had been filed about the pool lock, and though no violations had been proven, the concerns of residents were enough for disciplinary action. I crumpled the letter in my fist, heat burning up my neck. It was Karen. Again, she had found another way to twist the knife. That evening, I called the HOA president, a man named Richard who usually avoided conflict like the plague. "Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "this fine is nonsense. You know this is Karen stirring trouble." He sighed heavily. "Look, I know what's going on. I was at the meeting, but when multiple people complain, I have to take it seriously." "Multiple people?" I asked sharply. Another sigh. "She's gotten others involved. Probably her friends. I can't prove it, but I suspect she's writing half the complaints herself." I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting the urge to shout. "So what am I supposed to do? Keep paying fines for something that isn't a problem?" "Appeal it," Richard said. "But be prepared for a fight." A fight. That was all. This had become an endless, exhausting battle with someone who had nothing better to do than ruin my life. But things reached a boiling point a few nights later. I came home late from work, pulling into my driveway just as I noticed something unusual. Smoke. It wasn't thick, but it curled up faintly from the side of the yard near the pool. My heart leaped into my throat. I sprinted to the backyard and found a smoldering pile of paper and leaves, pressed up against the outside of the fence. Someone had tried to start a fire. I stamped it out with my shoe, adrenaline surging through me. It hadn't spread farther. Grass was damp from the sprinkler system, but the implication was terrifying. This wasn't petty anymore. This was dangerous. I called the police immediately. An officer arrived, took photos, and asked me questions. I told him about Karen, about the feud, about the 911 call and the HOA complaints. He listened patiently but finally said, "We can't accuse her without proof. Do you have cameras?" I shook my head. Until then, I hadn't thought I'd need them. "Get some," he advised. "Until you have evidence, we can't charge anyone. But if you catch someone on video, that changes everything." After he left, I stood in my yard staring at the faint scorch marks on the fence. My fists clenched. Karen had crossed a line, and now I was done playing defense. The very next morning, I ordered a full set of outdoor security cameras, motion detection, night vision, the works. If Karen wanted a war, then fine. I'd give her one. But this time, I'd have the evidence to back me up, because one way or another this was going to end. The day after the fire scare, I spent hours setting up the new security cameras. They covered every angle of my backyard, the pool gate, and even the side yard near the fence, each one connected to an app on my phone that would alert me instantly if there was movement. As I tested them, part of me felt a flicker of relief. For weeks, I'd been reacting to Karen's games with nothing but my word against hers. Now, I'd finally have proof. The neighborhood had grown quieter around me, but it wasn't a comforting quiet. It was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I noticed fewer people walking by my house, fewer kids riding their bikes near my driveway. It was as if Karen's gossip had painted me as a shadow everyone wanted to avoid. Even Emily kept her head down when she passed my house, no longer sneaking glances at the pool. For 3 nights, the cameras picked up nothing unusual, just the flutter of tree branches, the occasional stray cat, and one raccoon that seemed very interested in my trash can. But on the 4th night, at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. I rolled over in bed, groggy, and tapped the notification. The screen lit up with grainy night vision footage and my blood turned cold. There was Karen, standing at my fence again, a hoodie pulled over her head. She was carrying a plastic bag in one hand and a flashlight in the other. She crouched down by the gate, fiddling with something I couldn't see clearly. Then, slowly, she pulled items from the bag and tossed them over the fence into my yard. Empty beer cans, food wrappers, and even what looked like old newspapers. She scattered them around deliberately, creating the illusion of a mess, like she was building evidence of me being sloppy or unsafe. I stared at the footage in disbelief. She wasn't just gossiping now. She was actively staging scenes to frame me. The next morning, I didn't clean up the trash. Instead, I left it exactly where it was and waited. Sure enough, by midday, an HOA board member came knocking at my door with a clipboard in hand. "Got another complaint," he said, with a sigh, gesturing toward the yard. "Karen says you're not maintaining a clean environment. I'll need to note this for the record." I pulled out my phone, opened the app, and handed it to him. "Watch this." His eyes widened as the video played, clearly showing Karen tossing the garbage into my yard. He blinked, stunned, then looked up at me. She planted it. "Every piece," I said, "and I've got 3 more cameras if you want different angles." The man shook his head in disbelief. "This changes everything. Send me the footage, we'll handle it." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. For once, I wasn't the one under suspicion. Karen had finally handed me the rope she'd used to hang herself. 2 days later, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with neighbors whispering, and I could feel the curious eyes on me as I walked in. Karen sat near the front, her chin high, her expression smug as if she'd already prepared another speech to tear me down. But when the HOA president cleared his throat and started speaking, her smugness faltered. "We've reviewed new evidence regarding the complaints filed against one of our residents," Richard said, his his voice carrying across the room. It has come to our attention that these complaints were not only exaggerated but deliberately manufactured. Video footage confirms that Karen Mitchell, he paused, letting the name hang heavy in the air, has been trespassing on private property, vandalizing, and attempting to frame her neighbor. Gasps echoed around the room. Karen's face went from pink to ghostly white in seconds. That's a lie, she burst out, slamming her palm on the table. He's framing me. He's manipulating the footage. But Richard held up his hand and continued. The footage was reviewed by multiple members of the board. It is clear and undeniable. Effective immediately, Karen Mitchell is fined for repeated violations, barred from attending future HOA meetings until further notice, and warned that any future harassment will be referred directly to law enforcement. The room erupted into whispers. Some neighbors looked shocked, others looked relieved, and a few actually smiled like justice had finally been served. Karen shot up from her chair, her voice trembling with rage. You're all blind. He's dangerous. Can't you see? He's dangerous, but no one backed her. Not this time. Emily tugged at her mother's arm, begging her to stop. But Karen shook her off and stormed out of the room, her heels clacking furiously against the floor. The door slammed behind her, and the tension she left behind seemed to dissolve instantly. Afterward, several neighbors came up to me, apologizing for believing her lies or for keeping their distance. The man who'd asked me about the pool weeks ago even clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Guess you were right all along." I nodded, exhausted but finally vindicated. That night, as I sat by my pool, the reflection of the water rippling softly under the porch light, I realized the lock I'd installed to protect my peace had ended up sparking chaos. But in the end, it also revealed the truth. Karen's obsession with control had unraveled her completely. While my patience and proof had set things right, the pool was quiet again, peaceful mine, and this time, I knew it would stay that way.